Thank you. For our next presentation, we will have Abidemi Babatunde Babalola on the subject of archaeology of glass in Sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to show my appreciation to the Shanghai Archaeology Forum, the committee, for inviting me to be part of this conference. And also, I'm very grateful for the award given to my research. I'll be talking on the archaeology of glass in Sub-Saharan Africa. And this is the project I started for my PhD dissertation about 9 years ago. And I'm grateful to my advisors and Jeff Fletcher, who is also here in the audience, my second advisor, for encouraging me to start this project in the first place. So, yeah. We all know that in post Stone Age discussion in African archaeology, global archaeology, Sub-Saharan Africa is really not well prominent in terms of looking at the technological advancement. When most technology after Stone Age, Sub-Saharan Africa is a little bit pushed to the border, and the question of independence, origin, and indigenous development of technology comes to play when it comes to Sub-Saharan Africa. And that is one of the reasons why we don't really get to hear much about glass in Sub-Saharan Africa, because many people, and also including myself, when we see glass in archaeological context in Sub-Saharan Africa, we're pretty much quick to jump into the conclusion that it must have been imported into the sub-region. And this project has shown that that might not necessarily be the case. And it also challenges us to do a little further studies in the course of archaeology of early technologies in the Sub-Saharan Africa. So a quick look at the timeline of the development of glass technology globally. We see that from the time first man-made glass was discovered at about 2500 BC in the Mesopotamia region, up to maybe the first 2000 plus years, Sub-Saharan Africa was not really featured in discourse on glass technology. And we see what we also see happening at that time was a lot of discussion around the issue of primary production versus secondary production. And we have a lot of archaeological evidence of primary production in Mesopotamia and also later in Egypt, ancient Egypt area. Then we also see glass technology spread to other parts of the world. And there's so many things was also happening at the same time. For example, we see that the chemistry of glass was changing as the technology was spreading around the globe. So we have different type of glass. For example, the earliest glass is plant ash glass, and much later we have the natural neutron glass. And we also have wood ash glass, and later on we have the Chinese lead barium glass. So we have all these type of glass, showing up at that time. And interestingly, we still don't know much about Sub-Saharan Africa until between the 7th and the 5th century BC, when first evidence of a glass in form of bead was discovered from Mali, which is claimed to have been originated from the Phoenician world. And then we see that a lot of by 8th century, 9th to 14th century, there was increase in the glass beads in sub-Saharan Africa, especially due to the intensification of trans-Saharan trade at that time. So we see a lot of glass beads coming in from almost every angle into the sub-region. And interestingly, we have no evidence of a primary glass production apart from what we have in Shibuene in southern Mozambique, dated to about between 5th and 16th century, where we have evidence of secondary glass working, not primary glass working. And I think I should make it clear that primary glass making has to do with the process whereby you gather the raw material for glass and you make glass from the scratch. And the secondary glass working has to do with working of existing glass. So one of the themes that actually comes up a lot in the study of glass in sub-Saharan Africa has to do with the issue of exotic items, because glass beads and glass generally are seen as foreign to sub-Saharan Africa, and then perhaps that's limited our understanding of the technology of glass in sub-Saharan Africa. So that's one of the reasons why I decided to further on this path to look into glass making in West Africa, with special emphasis on Ile-Ife in southwestern parts Nigeria. So the site I'll be talking about briefly is located in southwestern part of Nigeria, Ile-Ife right there. And what we see, Ile-Ife is pretty much significant in the archaeology of West Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. And pretty much what we know about Ile-Ife has to do with, all these beautiful artworks, terracotta figurines, and stone sculptures, most of which are dated to between 12th and the 15th century. And interestingly, you see a lot of bead representation on most of these copper alloy work objects. And then nobody questioned why we have a lot of glass beads, not necessarily glass representation on this object. And then what could that have meant in the society at that time? But what really prompted my curiosity has to do with one of these images, looking at them and imagine like, oh, beads must have been so prominent in the society at that time for them to have been this well represented on the artwork. So the question is, we also know that that period between 12th and 15th century, Ile-Ife was very prominent. Ile-Ife was already in the making of the copper alloy objects. They were sourcing part of the copper alloy material from West Europe, which we know that perhaps through trans-Saharan trade, they were receiving the raw material and also mixing it up with the local copper alloy material from within the region. So the question is, was early Ile-Ife capable of making glass, even at that time, when you see how this beautiful work going on? So to investigate this question, I look a little bit into early works that have been done on glass in sub-Saharan Africa, especially West Africa. Claire Davidson pioneered the elemental studies of archaeological glass in West Africa, and she studied quite a number of glass beads from archaeological context in West Africa. Ile-Ife was one of them. Gao, Ibuku in the southeastern part of Nigeria was also one of them. She is of the opinion that basically there are two large groups of glass that she studied. Group 1, which she called the potash glass, and the group 2, which she called the soda lime glass. And she's of the opinion that group 1 must have originated from medieval Europe, and group 2 from the Islamic world. And specifically for Ile-Ife glass bead, she says that there is no evidence that any of the glass found at Ife were made from raw materials in sub-Saharan West Africa. There is no sufficient reason to hypothesize the existence of a West African center of production from raw material. That was one of our conclusions, and that was one of the, actually specifically she mentioned the site where I did my work in Ife, and I will get to that very shortly. So thereafter, we also have, the work of Lactin, Ige, and Rere in 2006. which actually opened the discussion on the possibility of primary glass making in Sub-Saharan Africa, with the possible center in Ile-Ife, southwestern part of Nigeria, where I'm studying. So they did element analysis of quite a number of glass beads and also other glass samples. And then they came out with this proposition that a group called High-Lime Alumina, HLHA, will have been the locally made glass from southern part of Nigeria. You know, the downside of this work, of course, a very beautiful work, is that most of the objects analyzed were collected from the museum and some were bought in the local market in Ile-Ife. None of them actually came from a reliable archaeological context, which is what, on the other hand, my project was set up to do, to see if we can produce, if we can have the same chemical composition from a well-dated archaeological context. So quickly, historically, what do we have about glass in Ile-Ife historically? I will take you back to early 19th century, mid-19th century, when one of the Richard Landers brothers in Ile-Ife visited Yoruba and southwestern part of Nigeria, and he wrote about his encounter in a market called Katunga, in further north of Ile-Ife, where he bought an object that he described, you know, that looked glassy, and the seller told him that the object was dug up from a country further south, where the people believe that all their parents originated from. And from Yoruba oral history and history of tradition, we all believe that Yoruba originated from Ile-Ife. So that's the first record of glass bead from Ile-Ife that we have. And then in 1910, Frobenius, the German ethnographer, visited Ile-Ife, and he visited so many sites in Ile-Ife, and they dug, you know, at so many archaeological sites as well. And they encountered some, you know, ceramic objects with glaze on the inside and outside. And they described, you know, it as what you see up there. You know, he was so excited that, you know, he was encountering these objects that are really glazed on the inside and on the outside, you know, in different colors. And these are the crucibles that eventually, you know, came across all, you know, complete set of this crucible. So the question remains, was there glass making in pre-colonial West Africa? You know, we have all these historical record, and we also have Leo Frobenius accounts. We have archaeological record of early archaeologists that worked in Ile-Ife, but none of it has actually answered the question, was there glass making in pre-colonial West Africa? And that takes us to the site called Igbo-Olokun in northern, further north, in northern part of the city. So this site, like I said earlier, has been excavated from early 20th century until recently, and there has been a lot of glass beads and other glass-related objects that were excavated from the site, but none actually addressed the issue of glass making in terms of the technology. So since 2010, we started excavating at the site Igbo-Olokun, which is located right, like I said, at the northern periphery of the city. And one of the pressing questions was to really look into the question of primary glass making as opposed to secondary glass working. And we were also interested in looking at the evidence. What evidence do we have to look out for us to come to the conclusion if there was primary glass making or if it was secondary glass making, and how was space also utilized within the workshop area? Those are the questions that we were interested in, and among others. So since 2010, we've been digging at the site, thanks to Connie Museum of Glass and the McDonald Institute of Archaeological Research. So we've been able to go back there in 2017 to carry out more excavation, and the picture you're seeing there is from our 2017 excavation, where we're able to expound the units that we dug in 2011 and 12. So what did we find? We find quite a number of materials. First of all, we found crucible fragments, different glass color on the inside. This is fragment from the complete one I showed you earlier. Unfortunately for us, there was no complete vessel from our collection, but at least from Leo Frobinus' work and Franquiles' work, we're able to have a pretty good sense of how the complete crucible looked like. And what you see here is the fragment of the crucible. So what were the crucible used for? Were they used in glass making or glass working? And how was it used? And where are the other tools, e.g. iron objects? So how do we know that they use iron objects? Of course, glass making involves high temperature activities, and you don't expect them that they will move so close to the furnace, during the production. So we expect that they were using other tools in the production, like iron object. And also, this piece on your the lower right is a piece of a lid of the crucible, which has 3 holes, on top of it, which we believe that they must have been used to lift the lid while the crucible is still very hot. So we also found a lot of glass beads. About 20,000 glass beads have been counted so far from our excavation. And the interesting thing is not in the number of the glass beads, but also in the varieties. These are not well-made, finished glass beads. These are glass beads that are still in the process of making, which shows that we're dealing with an industrial site, not a consumption site, and nothing actually indicate consumption at the site. Then the big question comes in: where are they from? Where are they from? That's what everybody is interested in. Where are these glass from? And then how are we able to trace the source of these glass beads? So I will come to that very shortly. Another group of material we found are the production debris, which obviously points at some form of glass working or glass making at the site. These are different form of the production debris that we have from the site, from the collapsed, deformed tube to an unperforated glass cane. We have the droplets, and we have all these chrome beads, among others. That's just to give you a sense of what we have in the production debris assemblage. In terms of feature, the question that have been asked most of the time is, if you have glass production there, where is the furnace, or where are the furnaces? During our 2007 excavation, after we opened a more space, so where we encountered these several pits. Some of them, as you can see, are conjoined, and some with channel, and we couldn't go beyond this because of time. But we believe the question is, are these really remnants of furnace? We don't know, because there is no precedence for glass making in Sub-Saharan Africa, so we don't know how the furnace will have looked like, and it would be silly of us to compare the furnace in the Mesopotamia, in the Levant, in the Roman world with the type of furnace that we should find at this site, because we don't know what the furnace will have looked like. However, we strongly believe that these pits are most likely connected with the furnace. From 2010, we've been recovering this type of materials that we don't know on your left top there, that we don't know exactly what it is. But over time, we've been thinking that this might be some of the remnants of the furnace. And then in 2017, we came across that guy on the right top of the screen, which he has part of a clay attached to something that looked like this guy, which gives us a sense that perhaps we're dealing with a part of the furnace structure that was destroyed at that time. I will run through the remaining slide quickly. So we've done quite a number of composition analysis of the glass beads, and we're able to identify that most of the glass beads that we have analyzed so far fall within this category that Lactin and colleague called high-lime alumina. That's the blue on the top. And we also have this group down, low-lime, low alumina, and then we have this one, low lime, moderate alumina. So we believe that the high lime alumina glass actually dominates the group, and they are mostly blue color or colorless or green. You don't see them in red and yellow. And the low lime high alumina are mostly in yellow and red. So this chart shows, we try to look at the relationship among the glass bead, the crucible glass, and the debris to see if they fit into a single production tradition. And as you can see there, we have pretty much the same thing, which shows that the debris, the crucible glass, and the glass bead all fit into a single glass production. So, yeah, we did some work on the crucible as well, elemental analysis of the crucible, which actually help us to answer the question of primary glass making or secondary glass working. As you can see, what you see here, the red and blue arrow pointing at a quartz residue in the matrix of the glass on the inside of one of the crucible fragments. And the question of how would this residue have migrated from the fabric of the crucible into the glass comes to play. Then we think that the crucible actually represents unmelted quartz grain from the raw material fed into the crucible. So we also have, that is the crucible fabric, showing that the crucible is actually of a different clay, different from the domestic clay. So this is presence of copper-rich particles in the red glass adhering to the crucible fragment from the site, which indicates metallic copper was used as the colorant for the red color. What you see there are just copper priests, which shows that copper was actually added into the batch in the crucible. So I think one of the most convincing evidence we've had so far is this piece of crucible fragment with semi-finished glass, stuck on the inside of it. This actually was discovered from the collection of the Natural History Museum of Abidemi Babatunde University, and thanks to Leventis Foundation, we've been looking at this piece of semi-finished glass, and as you can see from the image here, that is a backscatter image of the semi-finished glass, which shows that the structure is highly heterogeneous. You see a lot of quartz grain, and you see so many places where the raw material are yet to fuse, to make glass. And also so we try to contrast the glass high-lima aluminum glass bead from the site with the Roman glass and the Egyptian glass, and you can see there's a sharp contrast between the glass from Ile-Ife and that from the late Bronze Age Egypt and the Roman glass, which shows that this glass is a different glass entirely. So far so good. Looking at all the collections, all the assemblage we have, the glass bead, the production debris, and the crucible and other materials, we're able to draw this schematic image of the complete chain of production at the site based on the evidence that we have so far. And as I conclude, we also now know that the high-lima aluminum glass bead from this site in Ile-Ife actually traveled along, River Niger across West Africa. And perhaps what we are seeing there might be a representation of the glass bead road in West Africa, as we have the Silk Road in Eurasia world. Perhaps that's also what we're seeing there. So as I conclude, pretty much we know that the glass bead was a significant craft in pre-colonial West Africa, and the high-lima aluminum glass bead was locally made using raw material from within the locality. We were able to link the raw material of the glass bead with the geological components within that area, which give us that confidence that they were actually sourcing the raw material from the vicinity. And I should mention that we believe that snail shell was one of the raw material that they used, and perhaps that was what gave the high aluminum content in the glass. That was why I have the picture of the snail shell, because people have asked me, like, what type of snail and how many snail would they have to gather to add to the recipe. In the region where I'm working at, the snail there are really giant snail, and they are not really so hard to get. So we also know that no single Islamic glass bead has been found from this site so far. And over 120 glass beads have been analyzed, and everything clustered within these three groups. And quickly, this is about the first time we have complete sequence of a glass bead making from raw material, from the making of a glass from raw material to the final stage of a glass bead cutting and polishing. So this project also points at a regional exchange and a long distance trade from different perspectives. The idea that the forested zone of West Africa was not really prominent in Sub-Saharan, Trans-Saharan trade is a little bit kind of being addressed with this evidence, where we now have evidence that the glass bead from this site actually moved across West Africa. And then lastly, I think what we have is a discovery of another regional glass invention. The issue of invention of glass is been prominent in African archaeology. And I believe that if the lead barium Chinese glass was, according to Professor Freeman, that was the second invention of glass, I believe this will also be another invention of glass. And I also believe that invention of glass was not just a single episode. After the very first discovery, there was several episodes of invention of new type of glass based on the raw material that was available within each region. And lastly, I would like to say a very big thank you to all the organizations that have been part of the research. Thank you.